Hello and welcome back to another episode of Word Wednesday. I'm your host, Paige Goodger, and as always, we have Bix Weir from roadtoruta.com. How's it going, Bix?
It's going great. I'm fresh off the Bitcoin Bend tour, and I'm ready to dive back into a Word Wednesday.
Yes, I love all the videos of you singing and just everyone being together, and that was such a great event. It was so fun.
It truthfully, it felt like old times. We hardly knew there was any kind of COVID going on. So yeah, it was great. We all need to get back out there.
So for today's word/words, we are going to be discussing Gesara and NESARA, or Gesra Nesra, as Bix likes to say on his YouTube channel. So NESARA is the National Economic Security and Reformation Act. And this was a set of proposed economic reforms for the United States. The proposals of this act include replacing the income tax with a national sales tax, abolishing compound interest on secured loans, and returning to a biometric currency, resulting in a 0% inflation and a more stable economy. And GESARA is the Global Economic Security and Reform Act, and it's a global prosperity program. And the proposals of this act include making all human currencies in circulation gold, abolishing the income tax, making personal taxes monetarily unnecessary, and adopting a new 14% single rate tax on new non-core items that will provide a sustainable revenue stream for all national governments. So essentially a global reset on how we run all financial and political systems. And it would remove power from the federal bank and reestablish true constitutional law and theoretically return a lot of money, stolen money, to humanity. So Bix, what is your take on NESARA, GESARA? Do you think it's the good guys? Is it real?
It's definitely real. It's not the first one. It's been around since NESARA has been around since the early 1990s, I think. It is not going to ever be introduced. The amount of things that it does not cover is staggering. For example, what happens to the old system? How do they reallocate money to people? How do they get rid of all the bankers who have 99.9% of all the wealth in the world? I mean, the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston and the Roto-Roota documents that I had uncovered back in 2007 asks all these questions. There's about 40 different questions that they can't even answer. And the biggest question is, who's the decider? Who decides? You could say, oh, the whole world's on a gold standard tomorrow. Well, what about the countries that don't have any gold? What about the people who don't have any gold? What about
would there be some type of reallocation in the GESARA document? I was reading like, well, there's enough gold to redistribute to everyone in the whole entire world and everyone would be millionaires. And I was like, well, how would that necessarily happen? And I am a newbie with this. I just looked into this for this week's episode, so I really don't have a ton of information. So how would that even happen?
You're better off than most of the people who are knee deep in this stuff. They couldn't describe how they talk someone who has all the gold into giving someone their fair share on the other side of the world. I mean, it's really, when you sit back and think of it, and I like this to get a little pissed off about it because, oh, Bix, you're throwing it out like you didn't even study it. I studied it. I studied it back in the 2000. The first article I wrote on it was 2012. It won't work. It's very simple. There can't be any deciders. These handful of people are trying to keep control of the old system. They're playing it up like, oh, this is all of a sudden we're going to forgive debt to certain people in certain countries, and we're going to take back all the bad guys' ill-gotten booty, and we're not going to let the banks charge interest anymore. It's all bull. None of it, not one little bit of it would work. You can't get 7 billion people to decide on anything like that, especially if it requires the rich to give all their gold back to this central community to decide who gets what and how they're going to get it. which countries will be better off, which countries will be worse off. I mean, there's so many things that just do not work. And that's why this thing has been around for so long. It's been around for 30 years and nothing ever happens. But every couple of years, it's like, oh, this is the answer. And GESARA is the same way. It's just on a global scale.
Yeah, so your main points for it not working are um, how would the gold be redistributed, and then how would the current system just be wiped out and deleted without there being some type of ramifications for everyone involved, and how would you get the people in power out of power?
Those are some of the good ones. And like I said, the Federal Reserve had 40 questions. And here's a good one. Okay, what's going to happen to the old currency? You're going to back everything with gold. First of all, nobody knows how much gold there is in the world. Nobody has any kind of clue. A group called CPM Group and the gold.org will say there's 200,000 tons. I happen to know personally there's over 1 million tons. So all of a sudden, all those pieces of paper that are backed by gold, nobody knows what they're worth because nobody knows how much gold there is and how much gold there will be found. You know, should South Africa, who has massive amounts of gold, be the richest country in the world? I don't know. What about the gold in the Grand Canyon? Are we going to pull that out? Are we going to rip apart the Grand Canyon to get the gold because a handful of people say that gold is the best way to go? No, it's ridiculous. And the Federal Reserve even says it's not the best way. The best way is not to have deciders. And here's the good one. Who's going to tell, because there are deciders, somebody's going to have to decide, oh, this is the new system. And oh, by the way, all you pensioners, all you people with debt-based assets in your 401k, which is every single 401k invests in bonds and mortgage-backed securities, and all that is part of the retirement system of everyone. You guys are going to get nothing except your little allotment. I don't care how long you've worked, how long you've built up your nest egg, you're going to get nothing because those are debt-based assets that you invested in. I mean, the whole thing is so ridiculous when you dig down to the nitty-gritty. And how do you get rid of $2 quadrillion worth of derivatives and say, okay, those are gone. Everybody, it's going to be a situation where everybody loses everything. Now, I've heard some NESARA GESARA people say, no, Bix, this is for after the crash. After the crash, nobody's going to trust these leaders, these supposed leaders, the leaders of GESARA NESARA, the leaders of the IMF, the World Bank. It's all big crock of crap. And the reason I know this is it's been going on for 110 years. For 110 years, they've been saying the same damn thing. If it's not NESARA or GESARA, it's the Iraqi dinar. There was a good one called the CMKX funds, the prosperity funds that will be given to humanity. And or Ben Fulford's going to save the world, and we're going to get rid of pollution. And we're going to have a one guy in China deciding everything that happens. It is so insane when you sit back and think about it. But I get that people want a solution. Alan Greenspan put out a solution in the Road to Ruta documents that for the United States, I think it's the best solution. And that would be to reallocate money according to Social Security balances. Because the people who have worked the most and paid into Social Security will get the most, and then everybody will get something as a base, and then you allocate money that way. But even the Fed said they don't know if that would ever work because the people have to decide. 7 billion people have to agree, and they're not going to agree on any of it. It won't be decided by a group, and let's name it NESARA or GESARA. But the biggest thing to me is it doesn't get rid of the criminals. And unless you get rid of the criminals, we're pretty much screwed once again.
Yeah.
I know that the people who want to believe it are good-hearted, but unless you can tell me how this will work for 7 billion people in a fair manner, and that's the key. It's got to be fair, and the fairness is what all these things lack. For example, XRP. Everybody said, oh yes, XRP has been integrated. First of all, XRP wasn't even around back then. They're saying now XRP is going to be part of the new SWIFT system, and no. And the reason I know the answer is no, because 7 billion people won't agree on a handful of bankers getting rich off the new financial system. It just is not going to be allowed. The IMF and the World Bank will not be allowed to decide. Most likely they'll be in jail for the crimes that they committed, not be the ones deciding what our new system is, because when the old system fails, we're SOL. And when we're out of luck, we're going to look for people to blame. And the people to blame are Federal Reserve, the US Treasury, the IMF, the World Bank, and the cabal of bankers who have decided all these things up to now.
So another argument for GESARA that I've heard is to be compliant with GESARA, your nation needs to be at peace with all other nations. And so if, you know, I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
Okay.
If this were to be happening, and we look at the history of the United States, and if this was supposed to be rolled out in around the time of 9/11, and 9/11 was a counterstrike to that, and then we went to war and we've been in war, do you think that some of what Trump is doing could possibly be setting us up to possibly enact GESARA, like Korea, dismantling of ISIS, and just kind of keeping the peace?
No. What do you, okay, so that's one of the rules of GESARA. Who enforces the rules of GESARA? The GESARA Army, the GESARA Guard. Who enforces these rules? And if a country's not at peace, what do you go to war with that country to make sure that they're at peace so they can kind of, I mean, the whole thing's so.
Well, I think it's just that your nation needs to be at peace with all other nations. So like we would need to be at peace with everyone else, which is why Trump is making peace with everybody.
No, it's just not true. The bankers, the reason Trump is making peace around the world by hook or by crook, and we'll probably go to war with China because they're not up for making peace, is because the bankers have profited off war. Wars didn't last very long while we were on the gold standard because they were expensive. You had to pay with real money. When we went off the gold standard and in 1913 invented the Federal Reserve, for the most part, all of a sudden the war started. We have World War I, World War II, the Korean War. I mean, it's like war after war after war. That's how bankers made a hell of a lot of money. They played the war card, and Trump is fighting the bankers, and he's saying this is bullshit. The NESARA GESARA thing, it will never work. It will never work. It won't work on a national scale, and it won't work on a global scale. The biggest problem is it just takes too many deciders. Anything more than 2 deciders for 7 billion people ain't going to work. We're going to have to go to something, but we're going to have to crash the old system first. And the only way to do that is to allow the system to crash. No more bailouts. The domino effect will start where the bankers have quadrillions in derivatives imploding each other. And then voila, all of a sudden, nobody has anything. And then we start fresh in the United States. We stop trading with any outside entities, and everybody kind of figures out their own way to go forward. Now, we just happen to have a hell of a lot of gold. I think gold will be part of our monetary system along with the cryptos, but it'll be a free market type situation. What are they going to do in places there is no gold? There's all kinds of countries who don't have any gold, but they have other natural resources. So they might say, okay, we don't have gold, but we can use copper or tin, or we can use some kind of oil-based, probably not a good idea considering what happened at the last petrodollar situation. But
something of value, something that actually has a use and that we can use as humans.
The key is scarcity. But we also need to end unbacked fiat money that is debt-based money. And that's what the Fed is. That's why it was created. It was created for 2 things. One, to create money out of thin air to fund all these programs our socialist government loves to fund. But number 2, to hide what was going on in the Grand Canyon. They found billions and billions of ounces of gold. And I've talked about that quite a bit. Today, they're there to keep the peace. And if they can keep the system going as long as possible without igniting the end that is coming. The end of this game is total destruction of everything on the financial monetary side. You can't get around it. The only way you can't get around it, all you can do is pretend and extend, blow the debt. What are we at, 27 trillion or something ridiculous now? And that's only what they tell us about. Catherine Austin Fitts has found hundreds of trillions. And I have always said there is no limit. They create infinity money behind the scenes and they don't tell anybody. Ruta wrote in the sand in 1981, in her little formula in the sand that she wrote, it was an economic formula called On the Road to the Golden Age, which says if you want to go back to a gold standard, the best thing to do, print as much money as possible, build your roads, your bridges, your military, until the world figures out you're printing infinity money. And I think the world figured it out probably 10 or 15 years ago. So Russia's printing as much money as possible. They're not telling the world about it, but they're just doing it because who's the decider? And there is nobody who can decide what we're going to use going forward for the next 100 years. The good-hearted people who are saying, here's how it's all going to work, have no fucking clue what they're talking about. And the reality is, if the Fed didn't know it and they've been studying it for over 100 years on how to do this, and they end up with, in 1981, they end up with, I think there was 35 questions, and now there's another guidebook with even more questions of, like, who's going to take over the means of production? Are we going to turn socialist? Are we going to be a capitalist country? Who's going to do all the mining of the gold, and who owns it? Should it be the shareholders of the mining companies be the richest people on planet Earth, or should the government? I mean, there's just so many questions that are unanswered.
But if the Fed is the one that's going to be dismantled and they're the ones who are questioning it, shouldn't that tell us something? Because if I had a corporation and I didn't want that corporation to be dismantled, I'd be like, well, here's 45 problems with your proposal. I don't think it's gonna work to protect.
I get what you're saying, but I understand that people say it's the Federal Reserve is evil. There's like 100,000 people or so that work for the Federal Reserve System. Some of the smartest people in the world work for the Fed. They don't believe they are working for the cabal. There's been a handful of people at the Federal Reserve System who have been bad, just a handful. And it's at the very tip top, not all of them at the top. If you go back to Arthur Burns, who was the head of the Fed from 72 to 1980 or 78 or something like that. He was dying to go back onto a gold standard, but there were some people, if you read the board notes, he is just livid at some of these people on the board because they were in the pocket of the banksters. He was all out for the American people. The Federal Reserve is not an evil institution. There are people within it who are evil. The Federal Reserve was set up to get around a chaotic situation in 1913. And that chaotic situation was the introduction of massive, massive hyperinflation by a very small amount of people because they found billions of ounces of gold. And there was only 100 million ounces circulating in the United States and only 200 million ounces in the world. And gold was money. It would have flipped countries. It would have overthrown everything. So to say that the Fed is some evil, gigantic octopus, yes, that's what they were invented to do. But it's not full of a bunch of evil people and all blood-sucking vultures. There have been some in and out. But not all of them. And the vast majority of them, I would say 99% of them, do have the American people in America as their number one priority. And if they knew what some of the bull the Fed has pulled, they would be disgusted. But most of them don't know. And it's not every situation that the Fed has been on the evil dark side. The U.S. Treasury has had the same thing. There are evil people within the U.S. Treasury. There's evil people within the government. There's evil people everywhere. I mean, obviously in a NESARA world, there would be no evil people and no war and everything like that. But that's not the world we live in. So the whole concept that you can rejigger things, everything's going to be fine because we've got it figured out, I think is a bunch of crap.
Yeah. So my last question with the whole NESARA GESARA is the hidden technologies.
Yes.
So if, we're a giant if on this whole thing, if this were to be rolled out, do you think that the hidden technologies and the hidden cures and certain things like that would also trickle down?
NESARA and GESARA have nothing to do with the hidden technologies. I mean, that's a thing. That's a thing they're adding. Oh, and by the way, here's what we're going to do. We're going to unleash the hidden technologies. Those are there to be unleashed whenever we want. Trump will probably unleash those anyway. Why wouldn't we unleash them anyway without, enriching a couple people? I mean, if you go on a gold standard, everybody who's got gold is going to be the richest people in the world. How many people have gold? Raise your hand if you have gold. I don't actually. I put my hand down because I sold it all. But no, yes, the hidden technologies, all that's going to come out. According to Cliff's data, it comes out not because they release it, but because those people who are in charge of that specific technology, as our government falls apart, they go out and sell it to other people and say, oh my God, there's no more constraints on what I can do. Hey, we got free energy over here. We got levitation devices over here. We've got cures for humanity over here, and they all run off and do their own entrepreneurial thing with all this hidden information they have. It's not, I am the Gestra King, and I say release 6,000 new technologies. I mean, it's just so silly. They should make a cartoon out of it.
Yeah. Okay, so on our Instagram channel, I posted a question area if anyone had any questions about NESARA GESARA, and I'm just going to quickly read through a couple of them. Someone said, what are the chances? Another said, what solid evidence do we have that this is real? And the last one said, loading the Fed up with all kinds of toxic assets, Fed creating money for intercontinental debt, ? So
I would like to address the last one. Well, the first two is zero chance and zero proof.
yeah,
But the last one is a funny one because I've heard it. We're gonna digitalize all this toxic debt and all this stuff. If they were gonna do that, and Bitcoin Ben's a big proponent of that, saying, "Oh yeah, the back system's gonna digitalize all the derivatives," and I'm like, they're so far behind. There's like 10, 20 billion in the back system, and there's quadrillions in the derivative situation growing exponentially every day. There's no way it can be done. It wouldn't fix anything. And that's another thing people need to think about is how we're trying to fix a problem. We're not trying to go along to get along. We're not trying to revalue everything so that we can go forward from where we are without getting rid of the problem. We need to get rid of the problem before we do anything. And getting rid of the problem is allowing the system to fail. It's going to be difficult. It won't be difficult. It'll just be, hey, why don't you say no the next time the banks come for a bailout?
well, thank you for clearing up some of these questions and ideas around NESARA GESARA. Are there any last little tidbits of information that you want people to know about NESARA or GESARA, or places that you can point people to do some further research?
Sure. In 20 years, this is probably the 10th time that I've heard about a plan to save the world, anywhere from NESARA GESARA to the Iraqi dinar plan to the prosperity funds. None of them. If it requires a decider for 7 billion people, it ain't going to happen. And ultimately, this would require a decider, and that means someone at that point in time needs to have the authority, the moral authority to stand up. It won't be the IMF, like who was it? Either Lynette Zhang or somebody was saying the IMF is going to decide this stuff. It won't be the IMF. It won't be the World Bank, two criminal organizations. It won't be the Fed. It won't be the U.S. Treasury. It will be the people doing what they do. We're going to figure it out on our own because we're not going to trust Steve Mnuchin to decide the fate of the world. And God knows Russia's not going to trust Steve Mnuchin, or China's not going to trust Steve Mnuchin or the Fed. So just keep your head around. Most likely in the US, we will invent a way to move forward on our own without globalization, without the economic trading back and forth with other nations anymore. And that's what was written in the Fed documents.
Thank you so much for joining me again, Vix, for another episode of Word Wednesday. And thank you all for tuning in this week. I can't wait to see you guys next week, and take care. We'll see you then.